The SERAPHIS CIPER, In the Shadow of John the Baptist, Episodes 7, 8, and the Epilogue. Episode 7, The Storm of Revelation. 3 days later, the tension broke like a thunderclap. At dawn, a small team of Israeli border agents engaged in a routine patrol near the Jordanian frontier reported gunfire in a remote canyon. They found spent shells, signs of a struggle, but no bodies, only tracks leading into rocky terrain. The local authorities suspected a clandestine meeting gone awry, possibly tied to antiquities, smuggling, or extremist groups. By mid-morning, news reached Dr. Abud, who informed Miriam and Father Benedict. They gathered in his office, the mood grim. All signs point to a confrontation among suspicious players, Dr. Abud said. Police intelligence suggests it might have been an internal dispute. Maybe the Circle of Serapis or some rogue faction from the Vatican side had disagreements. Father Benedict was pale. An internal power struggle. This is spiraling into violence. We're dealing with dangerous fanatics who are armed and willing to kill. Miriam raked a hand through her hair. We need a better handle on what's really at stake for them. Why risk lethal force now? They've already proven they can slip away, forge more documents. Why turn on each other? Dr. Abud shrugged helplessly. They could be fighting over resources, or the direction of the forgery operation. Or maybe one faction wants to come clean while another demands total secrecy. They spent the day coordinating with local and international authorities, sharing everything they knew about the infiltration. But solid leads were few. The border skirmish left them with more questions than answers. Tensions only deepened when Cardinal Vieri announced he was pulling out of Israel within 48 hours and that he fully intended to bring at least the Greek parchment with him. In a tense meeting at the government facility, Vieri faced Dr. Abud, Father Benedict, and Miriam. Cameras and press were excluded this time. Only the core participants, plus a handful of officials, stood in a stark conference room with stone walls. The cardinal's voice was clipped but polite. Given the dangerous events at the border, the Holy See insists on taking custody of the Greek parchment immediately. We have arranged high-security transport. The leather scroll you may keep for now, if you insist, but we cannot leave both texts in this volatile environment. Miriam, arms crossed, tried to remain calm. Your Eminence, the entire reason we're in this situation is because these artifacts were used as tools of forgery. Removing one to Rome might block further local forensics. And what if more data emerges that ties it to the infiltration? Cardinal Vieri arched an eyebrow. The Holy See has forensics as well, Dr. Levy. Our labs are world-class. You'll have full access to the results. Father Benedict cleared his throat as if about to object, but he hesitated, clearly torn between his loyalty to the church and the valid concerns of the archaeologists. Finally, he spoke carefully. Might we propose a compromise? We send the Greek parchment to Rome under the condition that a coalition of scholars from Israel and other neutral institutions can accompany it, ensuring full transparency in the Vatican labs? Vieri gave a tight smile. That is acceptable, in principle. The details can be arranged. My only condition is that we do not publicize the movement schedule. Security is paramount. Dr. Abud stared at the cardinal for a long moment. Fine. We'll keep it quiet, but I want official documentation stating that Israel retains partial oversight. If the forgery ring remains active, it's crucial for us to collaborate. A nod from Vieri sealed the deal. Miriam couldn't help but feel uneasy. She worried that once the parchment left Israeli soil, it might vanish into the labyrinth of the Vatican archives, accessible only on the Church's terms. Still, she recognized that the forging scandal had made the region dangerously unstable. After the meeting, Father Benedict caught Miriam's arm. We can't let this slip away entirely. You and I should go to Rome with them, at least for the handover. That way, we keep eyes on the parchment. She studied his earnest gaze. You think the Church will allow me, a Jewish archaeologist, to waltz into the Vatican labs? A glimmer of determination flashed in his eyes. They need your expertise. Plus, you've proven your integrity. I'll argue that including you is the best guarantee of authenticity. Vieri might not like it, but the higher-ups value your reputation." Miriam drew a breath. "All right. If you can push it through, I'm on board. We'll protect that scroll from disappearing behind locked doors." Arrangements were hurriedly made. Dr. Abode would stay in Israel to oversee the second scroll's continued analysis. Meanwhile, Miriam and Father Benedict would accompany Cardinal Vieri's entourage to Rome. A few Israeli antiquities officials would join them, forming a joint caretaker committee. The date of departure was set for the following night. Tension buzzed like static in every corridor of the facility. If the conspirators planned any last maneuver, this was the moment. That evening, Miriam packed her sparse belongings, heart pounding with anticipation and dread. This was not how she'd envisioned traveling to the Vatican, escorting a partially forged ancient scroll under heavy guard in the midst of swirling conspiracies. Nonetheless, it seemed the only way to maintain a measure of oversight. Before dawn, she and Father Benedict gathered in the main vault. They stood in reverent silence as an Israeli official supervised the sealing of the Greek parchment in a specialized climate-controlled container. Two Swiss guards, on loan from the papal nuncio, stood by in ceremonial uniforms, though their modern firearms were concealed beneath cloaks. Cardinal Vieri arrived shortly after, face set, accompanied by a small entourage. Quiet pleasantries were exchanged. Then the container was gently loaded into a secure transport vehicle. Miriam and Benedict climbed into an armored SUV behind it, hearts hammering. A hush fell over them as the convoy rumbled out of the facility, headlights cutting through the dim morning gloom. They headed for Ben Gurion Airport under police escort, hoping to elude any watchers. The roads were eerily empty at this hour. Miriam half expected a blockade or an ambush by the Circle of Serapis, but they made it to a private hangar without incident. A waiting plane bore discreet Vatican markings, engines humming. Within minutes, the container was transferred aboard, accompanied by the caretaker committee. Cardinal Vieri settled in first class, while Miriam and Benedict took seats across the aisle. Exhausted but vigilant, they braced for the flight to Rome. Some hours later, they soared above the Mediterranean. Miriam stared out the window, clouds drifting below, her mind a swirl of half-formed worries. Benedict clasped his hands, lips moving in silent prayer. Only the hum of the aircraft broke the stillness. By the time they touched down on the outskirts of Rome, it was late afternoon. The group disembarked into a swirl of discreet Vatican staff, black-suited security, and a few Italian officials. Miriam's feet hit the tarmac, and she inhaled the warm Roman air, tinged with traffic fumes and history. They were hustled into a convoy of dark vehicles heading directly to Vatican City. Miriam kept her eyes peeled for any sign of infiltration, yet everything seemed well orchestrated. Soon they rumbled through a gate into the papal enclave, centuries of religious authority looming in the architecture around them. The container with the scroll was whisked into a guarded corridor beneath the Vatican museums, where a special laboratory awaited. Miriam and Benedict were allowed to follow, accompanied by 3 Israeli officials and Cardinal Vieri. The labyrinthine halls, lined with ancient stone, gave way to modern, high-tech labs. Metal detectors, retinal scanners, and silent Swiss guards marked each entrance. At last, they reached a sterile white room where state-of-the-art equipment gleamed under bright lights. A tall, balding Monsignor in a lab coat greeted them politely. "Welcome," he said in lightly accented English. "I am Monsignor Ranieri, head of papal conservation. We will treat this artifact with utmost care." Benedict offered a warm smile. "Thank you, Monsignor. I know you have advanced apparatus here. We request that Dr. Levy be permitted to assist, or at least observe." Ranieri nodded. "Of course. The Holy Father himself desires transparency." He glanced at Cardinal Vieri, who gave the slightest nod in return. The container was placed on a wide metal table, the lab's overhead lights shining on the sealed vault within. A hush fell as Ranieri carefully keyed in a code to unlock it. Miriam watched with bated breath. This was the moment of truth. Would the church labs confirm their findings or hide them? Inside the protective case lay the Greek parchment, still in its climate-controlled wrap. Miriam felt a pang of relief that it was intact. She stepped closer, scanning for any sign of tampering during transport. Nothing seemed amiss. Ranieri produced a set of latex gloves, passing them around. He expertly removed the parchment under a glass shield, hooking up tiny sensors to track humidity and temperature. "We'll begin with imaging scans," he said quietly. "Then do a chemical residue test. I understand from your data that we're looking for synthetic resin in certain lines." Miriam nodded, slipping on her own gloves. She felt a strange sense of gratitude. Despite all the suspicion, at least this lab staffer seemed genuinely committed to science. "Yes, the resin glows under ultraviolet. We have the reference spectra. I can forward you the data." Ranieri smiled. "Please do." As they began the process, Cardinal Vieri and the Israeli officials stood at a respectful distance, observing. Father Benedict hovered near Miriam, looking both tense and slightly hopeful. The hum of the lab's machinery became the only sound, punctuated by quiet murmurs between Miriam and Ranieri as they positioned the parchment for scanning. Time slipped by in a flurry of methodical tasks, adjusting the imaging equipment, noting references, toggling different wavelengths of light. Miriam felt that old scholarly thrill at seeing state-of-the-art technology applied to an ancient artifact. Despite the swirling conspiracies, at least in this space, reason and careful procedure reigned. Yet as they neared the end of the session, a strange flicker on the monitor caught Miriam's attention. She leaned in. The synthetic resin glowed exactly where expected, but there was an additional patch of faint luminescence near the parchment's lower edge that she hadn't noticed before. Ranieri frowned. "That's odd. Have you seen that glow in your prior scans?" She shook her head, heart picking up speed. "No, that's new. Or at least, it wasn't noted in our earlier results." He zoomed in the digital feed. The glow traced an almost invisible line across the parchment's lower margin near a ragged tear. Father Benedict stepped closer, brow furrowed. "What does that mean?" Miriam's gut twisted. It could be more forging material, or maybe a hidden code or text that was invisible under normal light. The staff in the room collectively held their breath. Ranieri switched to a higher resolution camera and adjusted the wavelength. As if conjured from the parchment fibers, faint letters began to emerge, a series of Greek characters, so tiny and faint they blended into the surface. "Can you enhance the contrast?" Miriam asked, voice trembling with excitement and dread. Ranieri tapped keys. The letters became more pronounced on the monitor. A hush fell, so profound that Miriam could hear her own heartbeat. She began to read. "He that would sow confusion has hidden the path. Seek the desert's mirror. Truth stands upon the threshold." A ripple of shock coursed through the lab. Father Benedict inhaled sharply. "That's not part of the original text. It reads like a cryptic message. Someone left a clue hidden in the parchment's margin, presumably with forging resin. But who?" Cardinal Vieri stepped forward, eyes riveted. "A hidden message? In the margin of the same scroll they forged? Why would they do that?" No one had an immediate answer. Miriam's mind spun. Was this a directive from the forgers themselves, or from someone trying to expose them? The phrase, "seek the desert's mirror," felt ominous and symbolic. Ranieri typed the Greek phrase into a translation tool, confirming it matched Miriam's read. A reference to confusion, a threshold of truth, and a mysterious desert's mirror. Father Benedict rubbed his temples. Could it be referencing another site, another scroll? Or perhaps it's a metaphor. Miriam remembered Sister Helena's warning about an infiltration in the church, about factions wanting to restore the original teaching. A chill crept up her spine. This might be a breadcrumb left by either the conspirators or someone who discovered the forgery and tried to sabotage it. Desert's mirror could refer to a hidden location, like a reflective lake or oasis in the wilderness. Vieri, regaining composure, spoke firmly. We must keep this quiet until we understand it fully. The last thing we need is the media seizing on yet another cryptic clue. The Israeli officials exchanged uneasy glances. One of them said, "We'll discuss this with our authorities, but we can't ignore the possibility that the infiltration suspect, Rossi, or others might be searching for this so-called desert mirror." Miriam stared at the glowing letters, goosebumps prickling her arms. The message was no accident. Someone had deliberately hidden these words beneath forging resin, expecting them to be revealed under advanced scanning. Whether friend or foe, they'd effectively planted a puzzle in the middle of a puzzle. Father Benedict's eyes met hers, reflecting her own mix of excitement and dread. "You know we'll have to follow this clue. If there's another artifact or place that holds the real key to this entire conspiracy, this might be the only lead." She nodded, adrenaline pulsing. "Yes, we have to find out what the desert's mirror means. Because whatever is hidden out there, it could blow this entire forgery network wide open, or plunge us deeper into danger." They stood there in the Vatican lab, thousands of miles from the Judean desert, yet closer than ever to an unfolding mystery that refused to die. The forgers had manipulated centuries-old texts to craft a betrayal story, but apparently they or someone else had left behind a final riddle. As the lab's overhead lights glowed on the ancient parchment, the sense of an approaching storm, one that might transcend even these forged lines, loomed larger than ever. Episode 8, The Unraveling. A week passed in a blur of tense inquiries, hushed meetings, and frantic research. The cryptic line discovered on the parchment margin: "Seek the desert's mirror. Truth stands upon the threshold," became a riddle that consumed Miriam, Father Benedict, and even Cardinal Vieri's circle of advisers. Miriam pored over maps of the Judean desert and beyond, hunting for any location known poetically as the mirror. She scoured references in biblical commentaries, apocryphal texts, and even local folklore. Sometimes mirror or reflection referred to bodies of water like the Dead Sea, the Sea of Galilee, or hidden springs. Other times, it might be a symbolic reference to an ancient site known for its reflective surfaces, polished limestone, salt flats, or desert glass. In parallel, Father Benedict tapped Vatican archives for any hint of a place historically called the Desert's Mirror. He found obscure 4th century pilgrimage accounts referencing a reflective rock face near the Negev, said to glow at sunrise, but nothing conclusive. Their frustration grew, especially under the looming sense that the Circle of Serapis, or the rogue Gnostic faction, was also on the trail. Sister Helena quietly visited Benedict in a Vatican corridor, whispering about rumors that a clandestine group was mobilizing again, possibly heading to a hidden desert location rumored to contain the original knowledge. Miriam was on the verge of despair when a simple observation by Dr. Aboud, still in Israel, sparked a breakthrough. During a late-night video call, he recalled an ancient name for a region near the southern Dead Sea, sometimes referred to by local tribes as Marath Hamidbar in certain medieval manuscripts. That phrase could be translated as the desert's mirror. It was a desolate region once rumored to have deep sinkholes that filled with mirror-like water in the rainy season. Excited, Miriam pulled up detailed satellite images and found a broad, uninhabited area riddled with salt pans, not far from the Dead Sea's southern tip. The name had long fallen out of common usage, overshadowed by modern Arabic place names. Yet old maps showed references to Marath, likely a corruption of the older term. She and Benedict lit up with renewed energy. They requested urgent coordination with Israeli authorities to search this remote desert zone. Aboud, on the ground, promised to assemble a small team to investigate. The official in charge was skeptical, but eventually agreed, given the infiltration incidents and potential for illegal antiquities activity. Within 48 hours, Miriam and Father Benedict were back on a plane to Tel Aviv with special permission to join Aboud's expedition. Cardinal Vieri stayed behind, citing diplomatic obligations, though he gave Benedict a stern warning not to take unnecessary risks. The three Israeli officials who had accompanied them to Rome also returned, forming a protective detail. They arrived in Israel under the cloak of minimal publicity. Hiding from the media as best they could, they slipped into a pair of off-road vehicles at dawn, heading south along the Jordan Rift Valley. The air was scorching by mid-morning, and the dryness sucked every drop of moisture from their lips. Dr. Aboud greeted them on a dusty roadside, wearing a broad-brimmed hat. He introduced two local Bedouin guides who claimed knowledge of the region. They eyed the foreigners warily, but agreed to lead them to what they called the old sinkholes, south of the Dead Sea. By noon, the small caravan traversed a dirt track, each jolt sending clouds of white dust spiraling. The sun blazed overhead. Miriam squinted through the windshield, the reflection of bright salt flats ahead, making her eyes ache. Father Benedict prayed silently, bracing himself as the vehicle rocked over ruts. Finally, the guides signaled for them to stop. Stretching before them was a barren expanse of cracked earth, mottled with patches of salt. In the distance, a shimmering haze glinted like water. Beyond that, rose tan ridges of rock. The guides pointed to a cliffside that jutted from the ground like a half-buried monolith. "This is the area," said one guide. "Many centuries ago, they said water gathered here, shining like a mirror, but now it's mostly dry." The expedition split into two teams, scanning the region for any sign of caves or hidden structures. Miriam, Father Benedict, and Dr. Aboud tramped across the salt-crusted surface, sweating and shielding their eyes from the sun's glare. With each step, the brittle crust crunched, revealing dark, muddy sinkholes beneath. They had to tread carefully to avoid sinking. After an hour of fruitless searching, Father Benedict sat on a rock, panting. "I'm not seeing anything that suggests an ancient site, let alone more scrolls." Dr. Aboud gulped water. "Let's keep going. If forgers or some clandestine sect intended this place for a meeting or stash, they might have a hidden cave or recess in the rock formations." Miriam nodded, scanning the horizon. If the clue was correct, it might not be literal water. Maybe the phrase refers to a specific rock face that reflects light at a certain angle. "Let's check at sunrise or sunset, see if a reflection reveals an entry." They pitched a makeshift camp, enduring the relentless heat. The Bedouin guides, more accustomed to desert life, offered advice on preserving water and staying shaded. By evening, a dull orange sun slid behind the mountains, the air still sweltering but at least tolerable. Miriam and Father Benedict decided to circle the cliffs at twilight. In the waning light, the rock faces shifted from beige to golden to deep rust. They made their way over cracked earth, scanning for unusual formations. Eventually, Benedict paused, pointing to a section of stone that seemed oddly smooth, as if polished by centuries of wind. Miriam shone a flashlight. The surface had an unusual sheen in patches, reflecting their beam faintly. She drew closer. This might be it. The desert's mirror. Polished by salt-laden winds, maybe. They carefully searched the base of this polished section. At first, there was nothing, just crumbly rock. Then, near the edge, Miriam noticed a narrow cleft partially concealed by rubble. She crouched, shining her light inside. A short passage angled down into darkness. Heart-pounding, she called Doctor. Aboud over, along with one of the guides and a pair of armed security officers. Together they cleared the rubble, revealing a cramped entrance. The guide tested the stability, then nodded that it was safe enough for a short exploration. They squeezed through, the rocky walls tight around them. The air was stale, tinged with the earthy smell of ancient dust. After a few meters, the passage opened into a small chamber, maybe 4 meters across, the ceiling just high enough to stand upright. Miriam's flashlight swept across the walls. Her pulse spiked as she saw faint markings. Father Benedict joined her, staring in awe. The outlines of symbols, half erased by time, spread across the stones. Stylized waves of water, a symbol resembling a cross, and shapes reminiscent of early Christian fish. Dr. Abud studied them carefully, muttering that some could be from the Byzantine period, or even earlier. Then one of the officers shouted from a corner where a low stone bench jutted out. "Over here!" They rushed over. Resting on the bench was a shattered clay jar, fragments scattered on the stone. Inside the largest piece, something glimmered. Miriam reached in with gloved hands, carefully lifting out a small piece of parchment or leather. Hard to tell in the dim light. It was brittle, partially decayed. A hush fell as they realized it was covered in faint writing. Father Benedict's eyes widened. Another scroll fragment? Dr. Abud gently placed it on a cloth. The script was in Greek, but heavily faded. Miriam squinted at it, her heart pounding. She could make out only a few letters. She passed a flashlight to Abud, who read out tentative words. The one who purified in water. Overshadowed. Anointed. Watch for the sign. He trailed off, frowning. It seems to reference John, or baptism, but it's even more fragmented than the others. Miriam's mind raced. Could this be an original text that the forgers used as a source? Or a genuine ancient writing left here centuries ago, undiscovered? She examined the jar fragments. One piece showed a partially legible imprint, possibly a maker's mark or the remains of an old wax seal. It was too worn to read clearly. They continued searching the chamber, but found no more complete scrolls. Just a few shards of pottery, ancient lumps of wax or resin, and faint carvings on the walls. Still, this was a major find. A clue that centuries ago someone had stashed a John-themed text here in the so-called desert's mirror. Darkness had fully descended by the time they emerged, the desert sky above them glittering with stars. They gathered at camp, excitement crackling through the group. Dr. Aboud arranged immediate plans to have the newly found fragment preserved and analyzed. The others talked in hushed tones about the significance. Could it link to the forged texts, or was it an entirely different tradition? After the initial flurry, they settled around a small camp lantern. Father Benedict stared at the glowing fragment in Aboud's protective case. It references overshadowing and anointing, possibly a reference to the overshadowing of John by Jesus, or vice versa. Miriam was thoughtful. Yes, but it's cryptic. Could be a typical phrase about the Holy Spirit overshadowing Mary, or Jesus overshadowing John. We won't know until we decode more words. One of the security officers scouted the area, confirming no other parties were nearby. Miriam felt both relief and a curious emptiness. The riddle had led them here, to this tiny fragment, but they had no idea who left the hidden margin clue in the parchment or how it connected. They only knew they'd found another layer in the centuries-old puzzle. Late that night, she woke to a half-luminous moon overhead. She'd been dozing in a tent, but restless thoughts dragged her back into consciousness. Quietly, she slipped outside. The desert was eerily still, the temperature dropping sharply, an otherworldly hush enveloping the salt flats. She found Father Benedict also awake, sitting on a small folding stool, gazing at the star-filled sky. She joined him, pulling her jacket tighter. "I can't stop thinking about it," he said softly. "We came all this way, found a tiny fragment. But does it solve anything?" She pursed her lips, reflecting. It confirms that older John-related texts were hidden out here long before any modern forgery, so John's significance was recognized by certain sects throughout history. Maybe some left behind their teachings here in secret. He nodded. And modern conspirators are drawing on that tradition, twisting it. The question is, have we finally reached the end of their game, or is there more yet to be uncovered? The desert wind brushed over them, carrying a faint tang of salt. Miriam closed her eyes, letting the stillness soothe her nerves. Despite everything, she felt a small surge of hope. They had uncovered forging operations, exposed the partial hoax about John's betrayal, and now found a genuine fragment that might shed new light, if only in small measure, on the earliest days of the Baptist sect. Yet a gnawing uncertainty remained. Who placed the margin clue on the parchment? Had it been a defector from the circle, hoping to guide honest scholars to real remnants of John's legacy? Or was it a trap meant to lure them into the desert, with only fortune preventing a deadlier confrontation? Morning arrived with no ambush, no sign of any other infiltration. In the golden dawn, they packed up and carefully carried the fragile fragment to the vehicles. The Bedouin guides glanced at them curiously, as if to say, "You came for that." But they accepted the day's wages with a respectful nod. They drove back to civilization, dusty and exhausted, hearts still pounding from the intangible sense of mystery. Word spread quickly in academic circles that a new fragment had been found in the southern Dead Sea region, referencing John's baptism rites. Dr. Aboud handled the official announcement with caution, emphasizing they had not discovered a brand new gospel, just a small piece with partial lines that required careful study. A few days later, back in Jerusalem, the group regrouped at the outpost. Security had relaxed somewhat now that the forgeries were widely debunked and the Greek parchment was in Rome. The second scroll remained under Dr. Aboud's watchful care, thoroughly analyzed for all forging traces. Miriam, Father Benedict, and Aboud convened in the conference room for a final assessment. They had assembled a comprehensive report: how the forging was discovered, the lines manipulated, the hidden margin clue leading them to the desert's mirror, and the newly found fragment. They concluded the John betrayal narrative was almost entirely spurious, though some fragments of early Johnite tradition did exist, and were far more subtle than the flamboyant claims of betrayal. A knock on the door interrupted them. It was an official courier with a package from Rome. Father Benedict signed for it, then opened the small box to reveal a short letter and a USB drive. The letter bore the Vatican seal, addressed from Monsignor Ranieri. It read, "Father Benedict, Doctor, Levi, Dr. Aboud. We've analyzed the Greek parchment thoroughly and confirmed your findings about the forging resin. Enclosed is the complete digital record of our tests, confirming the partial forgery. We also discovered more faint marginal notations referencing cryptic phrases about a secret knowledge. Nothing as direct as the clue you found, but it further solidifies the theory that the forgers manipulated multiple lines to promote a Gnostic viewpoint. Blessings and gratitude, Monsignor Ranieri." A sense of relief rippled through the room. The Vatican Lab's independent confirmation meant the entire Christian scholarly world would accept the hoax more readily. Father Benedict gave a small smile. "This is good. If the Church is consistent, it'll disarm future claims that we faked the forgery evidence." Miriam inserted the USB drive into a laptop, scanning the files. Each test lined up with their results, making it official. She closed the laptop lid. "So that's it. The parchment is proven forged in the key places. The second scroll is also partially forged. The real historical tension about John's role is far more nuanced than the fiasco the forgers tried to create." Dr. Aboud nodded. "In the end, we prevented a major crisis of faith and scholarship. People who want to believe conspiracies will persist, but we've laid out the facts." Father Benedict exhaled, eyes drifting to a small crucifix on the wall. "I only wish we knew exactly who orchestrated it, where the circle of Serapis is based, how deep the infiltration runs, but perhaps unveiling their hoax was enough to weaken them." Miriam stood. "We've done what we can. The infiltration suspect escaped, but the ultimate forgery scheme is exposed. The Church, the Israeli authorities, and the academic community are all watching for further attempts." They quietly left the conference room, stepping into a hallway lit by the afternoon sun. One by one, they parted ways. Dr. Aboud had more press matters to handle, Father Benedict had church duties, and Miriam had her own academic obligations. Each felt relief tinged with the knowledge that the full truth might forever remain elusive. But at least the immediate crisis had ended without too much bloodshed. Over the next few weeks, the sensational headlines about John betraying Jesus faded, replaced by stories of the confirmed forgery scandal. Scholars worldwide published articles dissecting the forging techniques, praising the collaboration between Israeli labs and the Vatican. Some devout Christians breathed a sigh of relief, while more conspiratorial circles raged that the truth had been suppressed once again. Such was the nature of unending controversy. Miriam prepared to return to her university post. She packed up her notes, thinking of the countless hours spent in the desert, the labyrinth of conspiracies, the hair-raising chase with black SUVs, the infiltration attempts, and the ephemeral clue in the parchment margin. She recalled the small fragment found at the desert's mirror, still being painstakingly analyzed, and wondered if it might yield a quiet but authentic insight into an ancient Johnite community. Perhaps it would remind people that genuine revelations need not come from sensational betrayal lines, but from subtle, honest scholarship. On her final day at the outpost, she said goodbye to Father Benedict in a dusty courtyard. They shook hands, their friendship forged deeper by shared trials. He gave a wistful smile. What a journey. I pray our paths cross again, though hopefully under less fraught circumstances. Miriam nodded. I'm sure we'll meet. There's always another scroll. Thank you for bridging the gap between faith and inquiry, Benedict. Without you, we'd have never navigated all the church politics. He shrugged modestly. I only tried to do what's right. And you, your persistence and refusal to be intimidated, made all the difference. They embraced briefly, then stepped apart. Neither had the right words to sum up the swirl of tension and wonder they'd just experienced. Some things, they realized, could only be understood by living through them. A dusty sedan arrived to take Miriam to the airport. Father Benedict watched it depart, hands folded in silent farewell. Under the scorching sun, the outpost stood quiet. In one vault rested the second scroll, exposed as partially forged. In Rome, the Greek parchment would remain under close study. Across the desert, the memory of old illusions and hidden truths lingered. Unbeknownst to them, in a quiet corner of cyberspace, an encrypted network buzzed with activity. Lines of code scrolled across screens in a half-dozen countries. The circle of Serapis was not dead. Plans emerged to seed new documents, forging or merging digital scans with real antiquities. Their goal remained unwavering, to fracture the foundations of orthodoxy, to cast doubt on every traditional narrative. A clandestine user typed, "We must adapt. Their exposure of the John forgery was a setback, but we still hold other texts. The AI will refine them, will unleash a new wave when the time is right." Meanwhile, life returned to its rhythms for Miriam and Father Benedict. They carried on, uncertain whether the next bombshell might strike weeks or years from now. Yet they felt a strange calm. They had faced the darkest attempts to warp history, and at least for this round, prevailed through transparency and collaboration. And so the story ended not with a grand finale, but with a quiet unfolding. The forgeries were unmasked. The genuine, subtle complexities of John the Baptist's role in early Christianity remained open for honest study. Yes, secret networks still conspired, the desert still held ancient secrets, and advanced AI could conjure new illusions. But for now, truth had stood firm enough to weather the storm. No one could predict the next twist. Perhaps it would come in another desert cave, another coded margin note, or another desperate attempt to tear down the old by faking the new. Perhaps the real clash lay inside each person's heart, a willingness to let fact speak louder than fear. For Miriam, Father Benedict, and those who cherished honest inquiry, that was enough. They had found that even when conspiracies darken the horizon, light can still break through, and a single shard of integrity could illuminate ages of confusion. Surprise endings rarely come with triumphal fanfare. Sometimes they arrive as a realization that even if the battle against falsehood never ends, each small victory reaffirms the value of pursuing truth in a world hungry for both faith and knowledge. Epilogue. Just a few months after the world had settled into the accepted conclusion that the sensational John betrayal passages were modern forgeries, Miriam Levy found herself in a quiet reading room at the University of Tel Aviv, checking up on newly digitized medieval manuscripts. She was tired from the months of interviews and papers, but still doggedly curious, determined to see if any overlooked thread might tie up the lingering mysteries. Late in the evening, her phone buzzed with a secure message alert from Father Benedict Franco. It included a single attachment, an encrypted PDF. Miriam's heart quickened. Benedict never used this particular encryption unless he'd uncovered something explosive. She opened the file. It was a photographic scan of an obscure letter, dated only 3 weeks prior, stamped with Vatican Library insignia. The letter bore the signature of Sister Helena, the same worried researcher who had warned them about Gnostic infiltrators. Except, it wasn't a warning. It was an extended confession. To those seeking truth. I write under compulsion, for my loyalty lies not with the Vatican or the so-called Circle of Serapis, but with an older vow. We have labored long to unearth a lost tradition, one that might have bloomed had it not been stifled by centuries of orthodoxy. The forgeries you exposed were indeed ours, but we never meant them as final truths. They were bait, carefully designed to lure the church, and you, Doctor, Levy, toward the real door. We needed to force your eyes on John's primal role. It worked, perhaps too well. You followed the margin clue to the desert's mirror, found the tiny fragment, and believed it was coincidence or sabotage. In fact, that fragment was placed there decades ago by our predecessors. Some of the lines are genuine to the 1st century, but parts were written in the 1940s, then artificially aged. The entire discovery was a stage in our design. Miriam sat up, pulse pounding. She skimmed further. Our aim was not mere chaos, but to erode Pauline Christianity's monopoly by forcing everyone, clergy, scholars, the public, to consider alternative origins of the faith. We orchestrated the tension between John and Jesus to jolt the world into re-examining core assumptions. At least one cardinal quietly aided us, believing the church must adapt or perish. Yet now our group is divided. Some wish to reveal everything. The advanced AI we employed, the masterful inks, the hidden margins we left in other scrolls across the Middle East. Others want to push further, forging new documents that claim even more radical truths. I am dying. My conscience compels me to leave a key. Look to the desert's mirror, not as a place, but as a cipher, embedded in older manuscripts from Qumran. You have glimpsed only a fraction. The rest, hidden in code, points to a body of texts waiting in eastern Syria, true 1st century artifacts that might confirm John's devotees believed him Messiah, or disprove it all forever. We cannot control what you do next. The chain is in your hands. Miriam's eyes darted over the final lines, Sister Helena's vow that the darkest forgery may yet yield the brightest truth. Stunned, she checked the metadata on the PDF. It had been received by Father Benedict from a Vatican library terminal, then immediately suppressed. Sister Helena was nowhere to be found. The letter changed everything. The desert's mirror clue, the newly found fragment, these were not simply random forgery attempts. They were part of a grand design to manipulate the entire scholarly community, possibly to force the church into a new reckoning. The story of John's betrayal had been bait, concealing a deeper puzzle. A second message arrived from Benedict. Miriam, just got your reaction. I'm as flawed as you. The Vatican denies Sister Helena's existence in their records. They won't even confirm the letter's authenticity. But we both know the truth. I found hints in the archives that she had ties to an AI research group in Switzerland, funded by a private donor rumored to have Gnostic leanings. Do we chase this further, or let it lie? There may be genuine, untouched texts in Syria, but walking into that war-torn region to find them, it might be madness. I'll leave it to you. Benedict. Miriam's hand trembled. She scrolled back through the letter, mind reeling. The original betrayal forgeries were real, but they'd also been a lure. The conspirators had harnessed the world's outrage, the church's fear, and the public's fascination to point toward another place, another trove, somewhere in eastern Syria, where the real documents might still lie, unaltered. In the quiet hush of the university reading room, Miriam stared at the flicker of fluorescent lights reflecting off her screen. A single question pulsed. Had they all been pawns in a far larger stratagem? She pictured the dusty caves of the Judean desert, the hidden margins in Rome, the taste of relief when the partial forgery was finally exposed. Now it felt like the opening move of a deeper game. What if, after all the heartbreak and subterfuge, a truly authentic set of Johnite texts remained, locked away in a corner of Syria, overshadowed by decades of conflict, waiting to reignite the same fierce debate? For a long moment, Miriam closed her eyes. She thought of Father Benedict, as torn as ever between duty and honest pursuit. She thought of Sister Helena, orchestrator or victim, or perhaps both. And she thought of the swirl of Gnostic believers, and which cardinal might have been covertly assisting them all along. A slow dread mingled with a spark of undeniable curiosity. A new crossroads beckoned, more perilous than the last. Because if the letter were true, if they'd only scratched the surface, everything they had done so far might be overshadowed by a revelation greater than any forgery. And the next step might unravel the bedrock of faith and history even more profoundly. Miriam inhaled, steeling herself. She typed a single reply to Father Benedict. We go on. We don't let them use us, and we don't run from the truth. M. Her finger hovered over send, heart thudding. Then she pressed it. Somewhere in the hidden corridors of the Vatican, somewhere in the digital enclaves of the Circle of Serapis, forces were likely already preparing their next move. And so, despite believing they had finally broken the forger's spell, Miriam realized a larger puzzle waited, one that might validate centuries of rumor or demolish them with a single, genuine scroll. She couldn't be sure who was ally or enemy anymore, or whether Sister Helena's letter was a final confession or a cunning trap. All she knew was that the labyrinth had only begun to open, and the real stakes lay beyond a war-torn desert, where the message of John and Jesus might be twisted yet again. In that solitary moment, she felt both a shiver of terror and the undeniable pull of discovery. The search and the danger would go on.